This is going to be a playthrough of the game Reluctant Enemies from Multiman Publishing, an entry in the Operational Combat series. Series I do like. I like the system pretty well, but I tend not to like the gigantic, massive monster games that tend to accompany it. So when I turn my attention to this system, I'm playing things like Reluctant Enemies or Burma, some of the sort of smaller, odder campaigns. I think still represent the system pretty well, but don't have quite the bulk of some of the other titles. It's not a really large game. This is the map. It covers a campaign in the Eastern Mediterranean, pitting the British, trying to secure their rear areas against the Vichy France forces occupying Syria and Lebanon. So it's only about 6 weeks of time represented by the game, in a fairly small area, fairly small forces. We'll see the Commonwealth here in Transjordan and Palestine, basically moving to Syria and Lebanon with an attempt to capture Beirut, which historically, they did achieve. They secured this area. There are basically 2 lines of advance, and there's a really excellent discussion on this in Consim World lately. It sort of outlines some of the strategies that can be played. But out here, along this road and rail line, it's a pretty good avenue of advance for the Commonwealth. Reaching Damascus, then cutting back towards the sea. Got to get over the mountains though, and then to Beirut. The second avenue, generally kind of in the center, so you'd be busting out of Palestine, up this valley between the mountain ranges, between Damascus and Beirut, and then cutting over. The third seems the easiest, right? Straight shot up the coast highway, but it's a very narrow area. Rough terrain on your flank, sea on your other flank. Very defensible and tempting, but can often be very difficult to crack that direct spot. And it's such a small game. These are the forces involved. These are the Vichy French forces. Few reinforcements opposed by Commonwealth. Few brigades, basically, and the reinforcements. So that small amount of manpower is going to tussle over this map area here. So we're going to go ahead and get it set up, and we'll look at the initial starting positions. So let's look at the opening setups here, starting with the Vichy. See, they're spread out along the coast road there. Have some forces kind of exposed, but essentially they're defending against an amphibious assault along this whole area here, all the way back to Beirut. See that restricted marker? At the start, there are a number of Vichy units that are not permitted to move. They can release 1 on the first turn, 2 on the second, then on the third turn they're all free to move. Coming in from the coast, we see here in this valley pretty strong presence. So they're going to be defending essentially along all of those axes that we talked about earlier. Going out to Damascus, it's a pretty strong force there, lined up in the good terrain behind the river there. But then we see they haven't really given up the plain here. Some strong forces off here, as well as some forward forces. So they're definitely at start looking to defend the entire area, including this central area right here. So we pick up with the Commonwealth. See, they have a pretty strong column here on the road, supported by a column right there. So it looks like they want to make a pretty strong attack up the coast road. But then we have another column here. Looks like it's trying to make its way up the valley. We have at headquarters there, Australian Division. Then we have a small column here. Looks like they want to push through, potentially support either the third angle or the first angle of attack. Then, good lord, why do we have this set up here? I don't know, the game calls for it, but these units seem poised to support either this column or an attack up here, which would take us along the rail line up to Damascus. But otherwise, we just have that supply dump sitting there, seemingly completely exposed. There's two things going on there. One, there's a special rule that the Vichy are not able to cross that red border into Transjordan till the third turn. And on the second turn, a very large Free French column is going to appear right there. And that will essentially compose our attack forces up the road to Damascus. So the opening setup sort of drives us to sort of go along all three of these axes, and yet it's really hard in the OCS system to support three simultaneous angles of attack. So we're going to have to choose which one to support. I think just the fact that the French are going to show up right there means we have to attack up Damascus, up this road to Damascus, which means we should probably be thinking about supporting it along this secondary road to Damascus. And that leaves us with either the valley or the coast road as our final avenues of attack. Haven't decided. They all have trade-offs. We don't really have the support for all of them. Having tried it, I know for sure. You end up just sort of muddling about. But that's how it starts. The first turn will be kind of critical. Generally, we see an amphibious landing here by the Commonwealth. And then decisions about whether or not to support all three of these angles. On OCS, you have this concept of reserve mode. We're allowed to set some units up in reserve that'll allow them to respond in their opponent's phase, but I'm going to leave that for the start of play. I always forget we play to win the game. So how do we win? Well, in this system it's generally accomplished by victory points from capturing geographic locations. So in this title we have two levels of victory: sudden death and then accumulation of victory points. So for the Commonwealth, sudden death would be achieved if they could capture Beirut or that airfield right there. For the Vichy, if they could capture Haifa or either of these two entry hexes, that would be a sudden death victory. But for the most part, we're going to get it through accumulation of victory points. And the victory points really come from two main areas. Try to mark them all with little white X counters there. So we see a lot of victory points to be gained coming up the coast road. Also, many victory points coming up the valley here. Far fewer coming out here from Damascus over. So we see out here this great open plain area, no victory points to be gained at all. So that's going to drive our attack angles, I think. If we think we can get to Damascus and then cut across the mountains, that could maybe give us a sudden death victory. But that's a long way to go. It might be tempting to hit all these victory points up here in the valley, but those are really tough areas to fight. Terrain is very much on the side of the defender. And of course here along the coast road, it's just the shortest distance for the French to resupply and reinforce. So interesting choices to see how we go about trying to win this game.